The law can be a confusing thing. No may mean no, but yes doesn't always mean yes, which is how we get to today's topic of consenting to not consent. Consensual non-consent, or CNC, is a form of role play that involves pre-negotiated scenarios where one party pretends not to consent to sexual acts, despite full informed agreement beforehand. While many adults engage in CNC as part of consensual BDSM relationships, the topic remains deeply controversial. CNC falls under the broader umbrella of BDSM and is often described as a form of rape play, where consent is given in advance, but simulated non-consent is acted out. The key to understanding CNC is that true consent is essential and negotiated beforehand, with safe words, boundaries, and communication at its core. Despite its consensual nature among participants, CNC raises serious red flags for platforms and financial institutions for several reasons. The first issue is legal ambiguity. CNC blurs the line between consensual kink and non-consensual acts in the eyes of the law. In many jurisdictions, content that appears to depict sexual assault or coercion, even if staged, can be classified as obscene or illegal. Courts and law enforcement may not distinguish between fantasy and actual criminal behavior, especially when there's no clear marker within the content that it's a role play. The next issue is obscenity standards. Obscenity laws and community standards govern U.S.-based payment processors like Visa and MasterCard. The Miller test, used to define obscenity in the U.S., looks at whether the average person would find the material appeals to prurient interest. The work depicts sexual conduct in an offensive way. The work lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. CNC content, especially if graphic or realistic, often fails this test in the eyes of financial institutions, even if it's intended for educational or artistic purposes. Even though CNC is rooted in consensual role play, it often simulates non-consensual acts, sometimes violently and explicitly. This alone can push it into legally risky territory. Visa, MasterCard, and other financial institutions rely on conservative interpretations of obscenity to minimize legal exposure and comply with banking regulations. Their content compliance teams often default to flagging or banning entire categories, like CNC or rape play, rather than evaluating each instance. Even if something may not be strictly illegal, the risk of legal ambiguity is enough to warrant prohibition. This cautious stance was further cemented after the 2020 crackdown on Pornhub and other platforms where financial institutions pulled support over concerns about non-consensual content. Since then, payment processors have become extremely risk-averse, particularly toward anything that could be mistaken for non-consensual sex, regardless of consent or artistic framing. Next is the issue of risk of misuse and misinterpretation. CNC scenarios, particularly if distributed without context, risk being misinterpreted as real abuse. This poses reputational and legal risks for hosting platforms and payment gateways, which could be seen as enabling or profiting from potentially abusive material. Then there is the issue of anti-trafficking and exploitation policies. Major financial services and tech platforms have ramped up scrutiny to avoid facilitating trafficking or exploitation. CNC content, especially if not clearly labeled or involving ambiguous cues, can trigger automated moderation systems or human reviewers to flag it as potential abuse. Payment processors often adopt zero-tolerance policies to avoid liability. Even when CNC content is legally protected as free expression or art, platforms and payment providers may still choose to disallow it to maintain public trust, brand safety, and advertiser confidence. Public backlash or media coverage around such content can severely damage a company's image, even if no laws are broken. Beyond legality and payment processor rules, many platforms and businesses prohibit CNC content due to broader ethical considerations and concerns about public perception. While CNC remains a valid and consensual kink for many, it exists in a legal and cultural gray area. Creators and educators must navigate a complex web of regulations, community guidelines, and financial gatekeepers. Until clearer legal definitions and more nuanced moderation systems are in place, CNC will likely remain banned or heavily restricted on mainstream platforms and excluded by risk-averse payment processors.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Adult Industry News, your ultimate source for the latest news about the adult industry.